In 1925, a survey team measured the Great Pyramid down to the centimeter and found it encoded to pi and to the golden ratio.
Nobody has ever fully explained why it's there.
Wait until you hear what happened to my own body after I went looking for what that shape actually does.
Pressure expansion concentrated at the very top of my head, in a place too specific to be nothing.
Frequency was never a sound to hear.
And geometry was never decoration, it's the vehicle.
The pyramid stops being an old building and starts being a diagram.
But a vehicle alone doesn't move.
It needs a motor. I had to move it myself.
You don't need a papyrus to give you permission for that.
One motion repeated on purpose. That's the whole mechanism.
In 1925, a survey team stretched a measuring line around the base of the Great Pyramid. They weren't hunting for anything mystical. They were checking stone against stone, corner against corner, the way any surveyor checks any building. What they found was a structure so close to pi and so close to the golden ratio that the margin of error came down to centimeters. Not myth, not legend, a number measured with instruments, sitting inside a building over 4,500 years old. Nobody has ever fully explained why it's there. There's a pattern hiding underneath the symbols you've scrolled past 100 times. The spirals, the flowers carved into temple stone, the pyramids sitting quietly in the corner of 1,000 spiritual videos. Almost everyone treats them as decoration. Almost nobody treats them as instructions. If you think this is another video where you admire an old shape and move on, wait until you hear what happened to my own body in the days after I went looking for what that shape actually does. Pressure, expansion, concentrated at the very top of my head in a place too specific to be nothing. What if geometry was never the point, only the vehicle? What actually moves through it? And why did the priests who wrote it down demand presence before they'd explain anything at all? To answer that, we have to go back to that measuring line in 1925 and to a temple a Frenchman spent 15 years walking through with a tape measure. But first, 10 seconds with me. Picture a small amount of energy gathering at the very top of your head. Let it start moving down slowly. That's the entire mechanism in miniature. Everything else in this video just explains why it works. Almost everyone who talks about activating a frequency gets stuck between two broken ideas. The first is that frequency means sound, solfeggio tones, 528 hertz. Play the right hum through your headphones and something ancient switches on. I tried that path myself, hours of it, headphones on, eyes closed, waiting for the tone to do something a regular song never had. It never did what the algorithm promised it would. Nothing shifted. No pressure, no warmth, nothing I could point to and call real. The second broken idea is about geometry. You've seen the symbols, the flower of life, the golden spiral, the pyramid sitting quietly in the corner of 1,000 spiritual videos. Decoration, something that looks meaningful without doing anything. Both ideas are wrong, and they're wrong in a way that connects. Frequency was never a sound to hear. It's a vibrational level, a state your energy sits at. And geometry was never decoration. It's the vehicle, the literal structure a specific kind of energy moves through on its way up. That claim starts with a text most people have never read, the demotic Book of Thoth. Egyptologists Richard Jasnow and Carl Theodor Zauzich translated it in the early 2000s. One honesty check before I go further. This papyrus itself comes from the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, centuries after the pyramid I just described, much younger than 5,000 years. The 5,000-year claim belongs to Egypt's stone geometry, not to this specific text. I'd rather say that plainly now than let the two blur together later when it's less convenient. What the text actually is: a dialogue, a disciple asking questions, a teacher named Thoth answering only after real presence is demonstrated. No shortcuts, no passive reception. You have to already be doing something before the text gives you anything back. Hold that next to the measured fact from the Great Pyramid, proportion encoded to a margin most modern buildings don't hit, a text demanding sustained presence, a structure encoding exact proportion. Two different kinds of evidence from two different fields already circling one idea. Something specific has to be built and sustained before anything elevates. Real activation, I've come to believe, runs on exactly two things, a vehicle and a motor. I'm going to show you both today, but only one of them is something you actually do. We start with the vehicle because it's already sitting in stone, waiting to be read correctly. Here's what most sacred geometry content never gets to, because it stops at "isn't that beautiful?" What if the shape isn't just old? What if it was left as a signal, not folklore, an actual, still standing structure, built as if proportion itself was the message? In 1937, a French researcher named R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch walked into the Temple of Luxor with a measuring tape and didn't leave for 15 years. He surveyed the temple stone by stone. His conclusion, published in the Temple of Man in 1998, is that the layout follows the golden ratio and that its proportions correspond to the human body. Egyptology disputes that second half. Whether the temple was deliberately built as a map of the body is contested. What isn't contested, because it's measurable, is that the golden ratio pattern is genuinely there, a structure, 15 years of measurement, a proportion that maps at minimum onto form, according to one very thorough researcher, onto the human body specifically. I want to tell you why that detail matters to me personally, not just academically. In the days after I published the last video, the one about the Egyptian gift most people never notice they're holding, something in my own body kept happening. Pressure, expansion, concentrated at the crown of the head, not anywhere else, not a sound. I want to be precise here because it would be easy to romanticize this into something it wasn't. It was a physical sensation in a specific location that returned more than once. It came at strange hours, once while I was editing footage, once just sitting in traffic, with no ritual attached, nothing I was doing on purpose to invite it. I didn't know what to do with it. I had Schwaller de Lubitsch's claim, a structure that maps to a body, sitting right next to a sensation happening in my own body, with nowhere yet to put it. Here's the concept that changed how I read everything after that point. Geometry isn't the destination, it's the vehicle. A structure doesn't hold energy the way a container holds water. It directs it. It gives energy a shape to travel through, the way a riverbed gives water a direction instead of a puddle. That single distinction, vehicle, not decoration, is the piece almost nobody says out loud. Once you see it, the pyramid stops being an old building and starts being a diagram. The temple stops being ruins and starts being an instruction. But a vehicle alone doesn't move. It needs a motor. I'll come back to that because naming it now would skip the part that actually makes it work. For now, do this with me again. Not the full practice yet, just its beginning. Sit up straight if you can. Bring a little energy to the top of your head and let it start moving down, slowly, toward your feet. Don't try to see anything. Don't force a color or a picture into your mind. Just move it the way you'd shift your weight from one foot to the other without needing to watch yourself do it. Hold that motion in the background while I show you where this comes from. Now I need to be honest about a piece of this that gets exaggerated online constantly because this channel doesn't get to skip the parts that are inconvenient. There's a flower of life pattern carved into the Asiayan, the Temple of Osiris at Abydos. It's real. You can see it cut into the stone, but the number that circulates with it, 10,500 years old, isn't supported by the evidence. The carving style points to the Greco-Roman period, thousands of years later than the myth claims. That doesn't make the geometry less real. It makes the age of that specific carving something I need to say honestly, instead of borrowing a bigger number because it sounds better on a thumbnail. Here's the useful tension underneath that correction. Egyptologists look at that carving and see a pattern cut at a knowable time by knowable methods. Robert Lowell, in Sacred Geometry, Philosophy and Practice, published in 1982, looks at the same kind of pattern and sees a cosmological language, the golden proportion, the squaring of the circle, the Platonic forms, describing how the universe organizes itself from atomic structure to galactic scale. Two ways of looking at the same lines. One measures when it was carved, the other reads what it's saying, both legitimate. Neither cancels the other. I want to be exact about what I'm doing when I put these together. I'm not saying a dating debate and a philosophical reading of sacred form prove the same thing. I'm saying something more precise, a religious dialogue that demands presence, a 15-year survey that found a body-shaped proportion, and a philosophical reading of geometry as cosmological language. Three unconnected fields keep landing on the same idea from three different directions. Structure isn't separate from what it holds. Structure is what makes holding possible at all. There's one more shape I have to address directly, because if I don't, you'll assume I'm avoiding it. Two triangular forms, tetrahedra, pointing in opposite directions, interlocked, spinning against each other. You've probably seen it called the Merkaba. I need to be completely transparent about where that name comes from, because a lot of spiritual content blurs this line on purpose. The Merkaba as a technique, two counter-rotating tetrahedra as a vehicle of light, was systematized by Drunvalo Melchizedek starting in the late 1990s in The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. That tradition attributes its own origin to Thoth. But the attribution comes from inside a modern spiritual lineage, not from archaeology. It isn't carved anywhere in Karnak or Luxor. Calling it ancient Egyptian without that context isn't a small omission. It's the exact blur I promised at the start not to make. But here's why the shape still matters to me, with that honesty attached. Rupert Sheldrake, a biologist, proposed something called morphic resonance in a new science of life, developed further in the science delusion. Stripped down, patterns propagate through a kind of field by resemblance, not direct contact. I want to flag this clearly. This is not consensus science. It's a fringe hypothesis, and most biologists reject it. I'm including it because it's the closest language modern science has for something that has no better term yet. I'm not saying Sheldrake proves the Merkaba does anything. I'm saying something more precise. If a pattern sustained by attention can function like a mold a field resonates with, then a specific shape, held steadily, not just glanced at, stops being symbolic and starts being functional. Form directs. That's the principle both are pointing at, from two directions that have never sighted each other. Up to this point, everything I've shown you could stay exactly where most sacred geometry content leaves it: fascinating, historically real, philosophically interesting, and completely inert. A fact you know, not a thing you do. That's where this stops being about ancient buildings and starts being about what's happening in your own body right now, today, while you're still sitting here. Kyle Gray, a contemporary author, not an academic, published by Hay House, read by hundreds of thousands of people, wrote an entire book called Raise Your Vibration, built on one premise: elevating your own vibrational state isn't a private idea I invented. It's a practice treated openly by people who never mentioned geometry once. What I do differently isn't the goal. Raising vibration is the same goal Kyle Gray's readers have, the same goal every healing frequency video promises and rarely delivers. What's different is the mechanism. I don't wait for a frequency to arrive from outside me. I use a structure, the vehicle, to direct something I generate myself. It's time to name that something. The motor is energy. Specifically, energy I move deliberately through my own body in a repeating direction, down from the crown and back up again. I want to go back to the sensation I mentioned twice now and sit inside it properly, instead of just gesturing at it. The phenomenon itself, pressure, then expansion, concentrated at the crown of the head. Not a headache, not tension, localized enough that I could point to the exact spot. Read energetically, here's what I noticed. The sensation didn't build steadily, it moved in a rhythm, contraction, then release, then contraction again, the same rhythm I now recognize in the practice itself. Energy gathering at the top, moving down, gathering again. The geometry, the Merkaba shape, two opposing motions around one center, doesn't cause that rhythm, it names it. It's a label for a movement that was already happening in me before I had a word for it. Before I settled on any interpretation, I sat with three separate possibilities, because a real experience deserves more than the first explanation that shows up. 1. This could simply be residue, something that stayed active after the earlier practice from the last video, the way a muscle keeps humming for a while after you stop using it. Nothing more mysterious than that. 2. This could be the beginning of reconnecting with what I already call in my own private vocabulary, the emerald frequency, a signature I recognized, not something new. 3. And I want to be careful how I say this one. It could be closer to what practitioners in energy traditions call energetic coupling, a brief, temporary mixing with another consciousness present on that same elevated plane. Gareth Knight's experience of the inner worlds maps how Western esoteric traditions describe entering internal planes like this. I'm not claiming that a 2,000-year-old dialogue, a modern esoteric map, and a fringe biological hypothesis together prove another consciousness was in the room. What I'm pointing at is narrower than that. Three unconnected fields, none of them speaking to the others, all reaching for a vocabulary that ordinary explanations don't have. I'm not choosing between the three. I'm leaving all of them open on purpose because closing the question early would be its own kind of dishonesty. What I can discern is what this wasn't, not an emotional reaction. There was no story attached, nothing I was upset or excited about. Not intuition, it didn't arrive as a thought, it arrived as a physical location. And there's a simpler test than any of that. I wasn't trying to produce it. I wasn't concentrating hard enough to manufacture a feeling. It showed up while I was just paying attention, not while I was working to construct something. That's usually the clearest sign something is real instead of imagined. It had the clearest signature of direct perception I can name, localized, repeatable, physical. And I checked for external influence. Was I just re-triggering the memory by re-watching my own video and found no specific image, message, or environmental change that would justify attributing it to something outside myself? First you notice, then you examine. I noticed first. This is me examining it in front of you. Here's what all of that leaves me with. The Great Pyramid's proportion, 15 years of measurement at Luxor, a carving at Abydos, honestly dated, a philosopher's reading of geometry as cosmological language, a modern teacher's shape, transparently modern, a fringe scientist's field, a popular author's permission to call raising your vibration a real practice. None of that by itself was ever going to activate anything. I know because I sat with all of it, historically fascinated, and felt nothing change until I did one more thing. The missing piece was never another fact, never a better symbol, an older date, a more convincing source. Every piece I just listed is the vehicle. Not one of them, alone or stacked together, is the motor. The motor was always the part nobody could hand me. I had to move it myself. So here's the mechanism, without hedging it. The frequency was never arriving from outside me. It was never a gift dropped in from somewhere else, waiting to be received if I sat still long enough. It was never a sound I failed to hear correctly. The pressure at the crown of my head wasn't a signal being sent to me. It was energy I was already generating with nowhere yet to go until I gave it a direction. Geometry didn't do that. Geometry named it after the fact. The vehicle, the shape a tradition 400 years newer than the pyramid decided to call Merkaba. The actual mechanism is smaller than the myth around it and more demanding than a symbol. Move the energy yourself on a repeating path and the vehicle becomes real, the moment you're inside it. You don't need a papyrus to give you permission for that. You don't need to visualize 2 tetrahedra with any precision at all. You need one motion, repeated on purpose. That's the whole mechanism. Everything before this was the case for why it's true. This is the truth itself.
I'm going to teach you exactly what I do.
This isn't written on any papyrus. It isn't a documented ritual from Karnak or Luxor.
It's my own method, built from everything in this video, and I've been using it for a while now, not something I'm testing on you for the first time today.
Stage 1 is the entire practice. Everything after it is optional.
Sit with your spine straight wherever you are right now. Take 3 slow breaths, relaxing a little more with each one. Close your eyes.
Bring your attention to the crown of your head.
With actual intention, not a vague thought, gather a small amount of energy there. Now command it to move slowly down through your body, shoulders, chest, stomach, legs, all the way to your feet.
When it reaches your feet, reverse it.
Bring it back up the same way to the crown of your head. Repeat that motion and let your breath move with it, in as it descends, out as it rises.
Down, up, down, up.
Let it get a little faster each cycle until you notice something, even something small.
And if you notice nothing today, that's real data too.
Not every attempt produces a sensation, and I'm not going to promise you one. Stage 2 is optional and only worth doing once Stage 1 has actually produced something for you.
You don't need to picture anything in detail. You just need to know that the motion you are doing,
down, then up, one continuous reversal around a single center, is the same shape a modern tradition systematized by Drunvalo Melchizedek in the 1990s named the Merkaba. 2 opposing movements, one center. You don't have to see a tetrahedron. You only have to recognize the movement already has that shape, whether or not you picture it.
the real Egyptian geometry.
The Great Pyramid's proportion, Vesica Piscis, the Temple of Luxor, is historical and measurable. The Merkaba as a vehicle for activation is a modern synthesis, one I use, not an artifact I dug up.
Keeping those 2 claims separate is exactly what makes the rest of what I've told you credible.
If Stage 2 doesn't click the first time, that's not a failure of the method. It's just a sign you're ready for Stage 1 again tomorrow without rushing yourself into a shape you're not feeling yet.
I called this an alert because something in me changed, not because you're literally the only person on earth capable of this. You might be the only one, right now, in this exact minute, choosing to build the vehicle instead of waiting for the feeling to arrive on its own. Here's what changes once you've actually done this instead of just watched it. You stop being someone who watches a video about ancient energy and waits for a feeling to arrive on its own schedule. That waiting was never going to work, not because you're missing some rare sensitivity other people have and you don't, but because waiting was never the mechanism to begin with. What replaces it isn't a belief. It's a capacity you carry with you now, the same way you carry the ability to slow your own breathing or tense and release a muscle on command. You know how to build the vehicle, geometry, the pyramid's proportion, Vesica Piscis, the Temple of Luxor, even the modern Merkaba shape is no longer decoration sitting in the corner of a spiritual video. It's a diagram you can read, and you know how to run the motor. Energy moved with intention on a repeating path through your own body. None of that requires you to believe anything about ancient Egypt or Thoth or 10,000 years of history you can't verify yourself. It only requires you to have felt one thing move once on purpose. Belief was never the mechanism either. Practice was. This doesn't end when the video does. It's not a task with a finish line. It's a structure that stays available to you the next time you notice pressure or stillness or that particular quiet at the top of your own head, the same one I described at the start of this video, before you knew what it was pointing toward. If you tried the movement while you were watching, even just once, even if nothing dramatic happened, write activated in the comments. I read every one of them, not because I need proof it works for everyone. I already told you it might not, some days. I want to know who actually moved the energy instead of just watching someone else describe moving it. That's the only signal I actually trust. There's a piece of this I deliberately left closed today, and I want to name it precisely instead of teasing it. I still haven't told you what I mean, in full, by the emerald frequency, the name I use for the signature I recognized in that sensation. Not a 9-level system, not a doctrine, just a private vocabulary built from repeated experience. And I still haven't told you what I think Thoth's function actually was inside that dialogue. Measurer, scribe, something closer to both at once. Both of those are already sitting in my notes, half written from working on this video. Neither one is ready yet. When it is, you'll already have the vehicle and the motor in your hands ready to use before I even explain what either one leads to next.